some personal content framed in a transpersonal lens on bipolar disorder, spiritual emergency, and intergenerational trauma. My first memory is from when I was 3 years old. I witnessed a mass shooting at my hometown mall in 1985. My mom and I hid behind a bookcase in the bookstore. Later on in my life, I would read the newspaper archives and learn that something like 10 people were wounded and 3 killed, including a 2-year-old toddler shot right through the heart. The young woman who opened fire was described as a violent schizophrenic.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in the matter of Sylvia Sechrist versus the State of Pennsylvania, let the record show. March 17th to May 23rd, 1976, Sylvia Sechrist of Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, 15, is first diagnosed schizophrenic at the Institute of Pennsylvania Hospital after an incident at school in which she removed her shoes, cursed, and paced around the classroom.
I was diagnosed with bipolar I disorder in my early 20s. I'm 33 now. I've experienced 6 instances of what might be called psychotic episodes in my life, each lasting from 3 weeks to several months. These episodes may have been the most meaningful and the most misunderstood times in my life.
March 2nd to April 17th, 1977, committed to same hospital after drawing pictures instead of answering questions on a high school midterm examination. Recommitted April 29th to June 7th.
These surges from the unconscious, as I prefer to call them, contain mystical elements, biblical themes, and Eastern spirituality. One time, in a few short hours, I felt I experienced life through the lens of a deep variety of religious, spiritual, and psychological systems, from traditions as ancient as Taoism to modern neurobiology, tapping into knowledge that I normally don't have access to in an intense and confusing whirlwind. Also included in these episodes is a lot of nightmarish content, including descents into hell that are too painful for me to describe or comprehend now.
October 1st to November 14th, 1977, involuntarily committed to Haverford State Hospital after repeatedly striking her mother.
In this presentation, I will focus on unpacking the content related to my family and my ethnic background and history. I believe that my surges from the unconscious contain an inner wisdom and force that has a tremendous capacity to encourage the healing of intergenerational trauma. This essay explores an energy that is especially potent and accessible during these periods of unconscious spelunking.
1978 school year, expelled from Eastern College in St. David's after having sex with 7 male students. Becomes pregnant as a result. Counselors recommend an abortion.
I first met the hostile energy and its larger-than-life ability to strike fear into my heart when I was in one of those states. The energy was attached to my father. I couldn't even be in the same room with him. I was so paralyzed with fear. This bull-like energy was going to kill me. I knew it. My father, he had been very critical when I was growing up, and he did chase after me and hit me and yell. But this energy was so terrifying that in retrospect, it seemed beyond him. raped him. This would continue every time I had that surge from the unconscious, absolute terror at my father, and the archetypical violent force I felt he carried.
Christmas, 1979. Living at a YMCA and working in a Center City peep show. Gives her savings, about $600, to a stranger who promises to invest it for her.
Later in these dates, I would wake up in the middle of the night, and the whole environment would become this hostile energy. Sometimes it was concentrated in something in my room, even something as insignificant and inanimate as a cereal box seemed hostile. It was as if the entire environment was out to rape me, and I lived with these states of terror in the middle of the night. Although, thankfully, they would eventually subside after a few hours.
May 19th to August 2nd, 1980. Involuntarily committed to Hahnemann Hospital after throwing a lit cigarette into a counselor's face.
Recently in therapy, my therapist, with my permission, encouraged me to, well, revisit and lightly invoke the hostile environment as rapist state, because I had been experiencing it again. Well, I did, and the environment in the therapy room shifted to extremely hostile. We only stayed there for a few minutes. Later in the session, while describing a dream, I found myself getting incredibly angry, like wanting to flip a table angry. My therapist let me throw a pillow. I seldom get super angry, and this feeling felt super uncomfortable for me.
August 26th to February 23rd, 1981. Court committed to Haverford State Hospital after stabbing a counselor in the back with a fruit knife at a Lansdowne Rehabilitation Center.
A few sessions later, I was describing being mildly annoyed with someone important to me. As I did that, I noticed some anger and sadness. And then suddenly I went into a dissociative fugue for almost the rest of the session. Totally lost, not knowing who I was or where, but in tandem, having a light grip on reality.
April 19th to May 10th, 1982. Committed to Fitzgerald Mercy Crisis Center after cutting her hair down to the scalp.
When I described the therapy session to my psychiatrist, she said it was indicative of suppressed rage. And indeed, that night, I had tried tapping into the anger around the person I was annoyed with. But to my surprise and some horror, my face had started contorting into the most grotesque, angry expressions I had ever seen. My body was contorting too, so much so that I actually bruised my ribs. I happened to be watching this happen on a program called Photo Booth on my computer. I couldn't shout because I was at home with roommates, but I know if I had, it would have been blood-curdling.
November 17th to December 3rd, 1982. Committed to Haverford State Hospital after striking her mother. Parents find a handgun in her media apartment. She had taped the window shades shut.
And I started talking about rape. When I did this, I felt a deep resonance with the mass rapes of women in Bangladesh during the war of 1971. This was not the first time that I felt I was experiencing, expressing, and somatically processing rage, hurt, and trauma associated with the war. 1971 was a genocidal time in Bangladesh, a time of mass rapes and murders. Over a few million people were slaughtered. The 2011 Time magazine article, 40 years after its bloody independence, Bangladesh looks to its past to redeem its future, recounts, quote, "This was a past that could not be buried, at least not in a country where virtually every household can offer tales of parents lost or disappeared, sisters raped, and children murdered, unquote. My parents, they had come of age during this war.
January 22nd to March 1st, 1983, committed to Sacred Heart Hospital, North Division, after spray painting her body with Rust-Oleum. Swastikas and the words, "Kill them all, thou shalt not kill," and "Kill, kill, kill," are sprayed on apartment walls.
The first time I got more information on the origins of the violent hostile force was during one of my stays. I had a vision where I saw my ancestors from what seemed like the beginning of civilization, lining up back to back in rapid succession. Then I saw my mother and father in bed where I was conceived. Actually, before even I was conceived. And my father whispered to my mother, "What do I do with the pain that happened in Bangladesh?"
December 1983, enlists in U.S. Army, stationed at Fort Jackson, near Columbia, South Carolina. Discharged 2 months later after being found psychologically unfit.
The vision then fast-forwarded to when I was a young child. My father took on that violent energy in the vision, and I stayed in a state of terror, knowing of this force's impending desire to rape and kill me. My father, he's one of my role models, and he taught me so much, if not emotionally available all the time. He's mentor-like and wise. This energy, I realized, was not my father. It did impact him, causing him to have a violent temper towards his 2 young children. But that energy was coming from the genocide. My father's family was homeless for a year during that period in Bangladesh. His house was raided and his family was lined up by a rifle squad, but spared. My mother lost her grandfather, an altruistic doctor who she was very close to. He was shot and killed in public by the West Pakistani Army.
July 1984, arrested by Springfield police and charged with disorderly conduct for spraying hate graffiti on a water company wall. Served 7 days in Delaware County Prison after refusing to pay a fine.
I realized that I have the capacity to transmute this energy, to help it become embodied and move through me so it's transformed in small bits. It happened that time with the contorted rageful faces and the body postures. It is not easy to transmute this energy. Sometimes I think it takes people over. It's really hard work, with the added difficulty of being labeled crazy and being pushed into the mental health system.
August 3rd to 23rd, 1984, involuntarily committed to Sacred Heart Hospital, South Division, after striking mother. Recommitted November 9th to November 30th.
Another time that I felt I transmuted this energy was at a cafe called Borderlands, which I also personally associated with Bangladeshi civil war and the genocide, partly because of the name. The vendor outside had gifted me a little orange tourmaline crystal. At the cafe, I had this inexplicable desire to break it. Of course, I couldn't because it's a hard stone, but I tried. And then I started shaking all over. My friend who was with me advised me to stop. When I got home, I tried it again, and an earthquake went through me. It felt like a release of trauma, and afterward, I just cried and cried and cried. I cried for my mom. who had lost her grandfather, and then I made a photo collage about her and her strength. Powerful forces and emotions coursed through me around this, and I felt calm, refreshed, and invigorated afterward.
March 1985. Purchases .22 caliber Ruger semi-automatic rifle at Bestco, Springfield, for $104.
Exploring these surges from the unconscious and the meaning of this violent energy, and even in